Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the San Diego Central Library at Joan and Irwin Jacobs Common for our annual Black History, Women's History partnership with the University of San Diego. This is our 6th annual event, and we are so proud of what we have been able to bring to you through this partnership. We have presented programs on NASA's human computers, the criminalization of Black girls in school, critical race theory and the 1619 Project, the Race Card Project, and the cost of racism for everyone. We strive to bring thought-provoking programs with the goal of enlightening, informing, and hopefully shifting the way we think and perceive the world. Today's program is no different, and I'm excited that you are here. But first, I want to introduce to you our partner. I would not want to do this series with anyone else. So Dr. Teresa Bird, Dean of the University Library, the University of San Diego. Just in time.
Thank you, Misty. As you can see, we just made it, rushing down the freeway. This is a wonderful partnership, as Misty has indicated, and this was one of these ideas that we've taken, made a dream come true. We started off talking about it as a town and gown event and bringing the communities together, bringing people who would be public library users to the University of San Diego's campus, which sits on a mesa in Linda Vista, and for us to come downtown and join the people of San Diego. And we continue to work on that goal. And so tonight, Candice Benbow will be up at the University of San Diego speaking, and we are so looking forward to having you. I have people and former students and whatnot texting me saying, I can't believe, Dean Bird, that you're having Candice on campus. And I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you, Misty, for having me down to your library again. And then my 2 librarian colleagues who came with me, they were oohing and ahhing in the building. I said, you can't take a tour now. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, so now to the good part. Candice Marie Benbow is a multi-genre theologian who situates her work at the intersections of beauty, faith, feminism, and culture, giving voice to Black women's shared experiences of healing and journeying towards wholeness. Reimagining how faith can be a tool of liberation and transformation for women and girls, she challenges Black women to think critically about how they see God, themselves, and the world. Named by Sojourners as one of 10 Christian women shaping the church in 2020, Candice has written for various outlets, including Essence, Glamour, The Griot, The Root, Vice, Shondaland, Madame Noir, and the Me Too movement. Her highly anticipated first book, Red Lip Theology, for church girls who've considered tithing to the beauty supply store when Sunday morning isn't enough, was released in 2022 and selected by Amazon as an editor's pick. Candice is a monthly columnist at Religion News Service. Her column, Faithfully Feminist, is home to her religious and theological articles and opinion pieces. So please help me welcome Candice Marie Benbow.
So we got over the first hump because I did not fall. And so as somebody who literally always has a dream the day before I have to speak somewhere that I'm going to fall, I feel like I have accomplished everything right now. So to Misty, to Dean Bird, to Oliver, to everyone who has made it possible for me to be here, I am deeply, deeply grateful and excited to be with you all today. Today and this afternoon and again this evening. I'm really excited because it's also in a library. I am a library baby. My mother told me that the 2 most important cards that I would ever have in life were a voter registration card and a library card. And with both of those, I could not only shape my world, but the world around me. So anytime that I get the opportunity to come to a library, it is magical for me. It's also where my mother took me every Friday. And it is also where I look forward to when my mother put me on what she called emergency communication only, because as an only child, I felt like I should always be able to talk to the other only person that is in this house. And my mom didn't always like to talk to me. So she would do what she called emergency communication only. And when I would reach to speak to her, she would say, "Are you in danger?" No. Am I in danger? No. Is the house on fire? No. Well, go get one of those books and enjoy yourself, because I need 2 more hours. So, being in spaces that remind me of just how beautiful and wonderful and magical my childhood was is always an honor. So thank you so much for bringing me here. It is fitting that this is an annual event that sits at the intersection of both Black History Month and Women's History Month. Simply because as a Black woman, we are often ignored in February and forgotten that we exist in March. And so to give space and light and opportunity to highlight the ways that Black women make contributions to Black history, to women's history, to American history, and to global history is important. To do so through the work of Red Lip Theology is incredibly an honor, simply because as I was talking to our Red Lip Theology book club yesterday, we meet at the end of, we meet on the last Sunday of every month. I remarked to them that it's often unfortunate that Black women are never heralded as the forerunners of religious history making in our community, right? So when we talk about prominent pastors and prominent teachers, we are automatically gonna hear about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? But we rarely ever hear about Reverend Dr. Prathia Hall, from whom Dr. King borrowed the "I have a dream" phrase, right? Very few people even know who Prathia Hall is, right? Very few people know who Jarena Lee and Julia Foote are, women who made strides in their denominations that allowed and enabled for Black women to be clergy. They spoke very succinctly and confidently about their cause and said, "It's on y'all to figure out this gender thing, because I know that God called me and I know that I'm supposed to preach. So if you can't figure out what you're gonna do with somebody in the pulpit like me, that's not my business." And the fact that they were doing that in the 19th century is amazing. And so I stand here realizing that even though I am not clergy, but I am a theologian, right? I stand here because it was made possible by women like Jarena Lee. It was made possible by women like Julia Foote. It was made possible by people like the Reverend Dr. Prathia Hall that created the opportunities for me to do the work that I do. Red Lip Theology, for church girls who consider tithing to the beauty supply store when Sunday morning isn't enough, was born out of a very interesting time in my life. My mother had just passed away. Well, let me back up. I was in seminary and had just gone through a breakup. My mother was still living then. I had just gone through a breakup, and my best friend came to visit me in North Carolina. And as only best friends could do, my best friend Shalita looked at me with all of the love that someone who has known you since you were 18 could muster and said to me, "You look a hot mess." And I, as honestly as I could, said, "Well, I feel it." And I was heartbroken. I had a relationship end very abruptly that I thought would last and endure for the duration of my life. It was the happily ever after. I had my wedding planned out on Pinterest. It was all of those things until it wasn't. And then I had to figure out life, and I was looking like I had not figured it out. And so my best friend was like, "Yeah, we gotta do something." One, because we were in our early 30s, and I don't know if you guys remember, but there was this pair of shoes. I think they still make them, and they're called Mootsie Tootsies. I love those shoes. And my best friend told me that I looked like someone's grandmother at 30 in those shoes. So she made me throw them away. I don't think that I have worn a comfortable pair of shoes since she threw those shoes away. But she took me, after she made me throw the shoes away and actually go to the store and buy a pair of heels, she took me to Sephora. And her and my line sister, I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, her and my line sister, they sat me, if you've ever been to Sephora, and this was really post-pandemic, so it was live back then, right? So if you've ever been to Sephora, you know that they have these little benches where you could try things, and it was much more relaxed, of course, than it is now. So they sit me down and go to work like they were on the clock. It was to the point where my best friend could not find the color to match me, and she literally bent down and went in the overstock drawers. And one of the sales associates was like, "Do you work here?" And she was like, "No, but I know it's down there, so I'm gonna get it." So they went to work on me like these magicians almost. And I don't even know how long we were there, I felt different. I felt seen, right? I felt like I didn't have to hide what I was experiencing and who I was because they'd found me, right? And then my best friend, before she left to go back to Illinois, said, "I need you to make me a promise. I need you to promise me that you're gonna find a way to do this every single day, to piece yourself back together." And so out of a promise that I made to my best friend, I would get up early and I would make my face. I would groan and moan because I could not put on my Mootsie Tootsies, but I was committed to seeing in her, to seeing in myself what she saw in me. I was committed to bringing back to life the person that had kind of died when that relationship did. And the truth is that I'm not alone in that, right? That sometimes when dreams die, when relationships end, when we lose people, there's a part of us that gets lost too. And when we have people who love us, who can say, "Hey, all right, you strayed a little too far. Let's come back in." We're able to find center again, right? And that's what she did for me. And at the time, I was also in seminary, right? So I am learning these the depths of theological inquiry, asking different kinds of questions about what it means to have faith and what is faith and how do we engage and embark upon each other as a result. And the two meshed for me. And they meshed for me at a point that I didn't even realize was so. And it was when a classmate came up to me in a library, our campus library, and he was a white male classmate. At my institution, Duke, were required to take a Black church studies course. And for all intents and purposes, I don't know why, but most of the white students wait until the last semester of their last year to take this class. And then they sit in the class and moan and groan about being in the class because it is the first time for many of them that their experience is decentered, right? We could care less about how traditions that have long excluded Black people teach other people about faith and spirituality. This is the opportunity, these are the courses for us to really examine what it means for Black people to be faith-filled and faithful, right? And so without, like clockwork, every semester there is a moment in class where the microaggressions bubble to the surface. This particular time in class was when a white classmate said to us, we were reading and talking about Howard Thurman, the great mystic, who I encourage any of you, if you've never read Howard Thurman, to pick up his work. But Howard Thurman speaks about, which if you've been connected to many Black spaces, you know, he talks about how his grandmother would want the Bible read with the exception of the books of the Bible that Paul wrote. Because Paul was, according to many, sexist and was an advocate of some form of enslavement, right? And his words were used to justify oppression on all forms. So Howard Thurman's grandma would say, "Don't read me no Paul," right? My grandma would say, "Don't read me no Paul," right? Like there's this, you know, there is this reality in Black communities, particularly Black faith communities, that there is a certain level of integration that our works need, these biblical works and these biblical narratives need. This particular student, classmate, said that Howard Thurman needed to be disciplined against other notable and reputable theological scholars. As you could tell, that didn't go over too well. Because it really pushed the point of, how dare you say that our experiences, one, to use the word disciplined, but how dare you say that the measure and the standard and litmus test for any kind of religious inquiry in any community is white, right? Like how dare you say that? So we had some colorful language. Our professor at the time, God bless his heart, was also the dean of the chapel, and the good Baptist preacher that he was, when he concluded class, he was like, "I might need a drink," because it was a lot that day. But I'm in the library, and I got my books out. I'm ready to study. I'm ready to do my work. And in walks this classmate, and I said, "He gonna come over here and he gonna talk to me." And sure enough, he came over and he talked to me. Now, I was faced with two options. I could get all of my stuff up and I could leave. Or I could stay and listen to what he had to say. And see, the tricky thing about being in seminary is sometimes more than not, especially if you are a Christian in those spaces, some days you feel like you want to be more like Jesus, and that was one of those days. So I was like, Candice, like, you can't get up and walk away, because, and as progressive and forward-thinking as I am, there's still the missionary Baptist church girl in me that is like, if you get up and ignore him and the rapture is in like 2 minutes, can you really say you're gonna go to heaven? You know, like it's those moments, right? Those burning questions. So I say, all right, Candice, sit down, just listen to what he has to say. And he gets up, he comes over, and he says, so Candice, do you consider yourself a black theologian or a regular theologian? And I was like, so if I do what I want to do and the rapture comes in 2 minutes, can I go to heaven? Like, it's those kind of questions. And out of my mouth, before I realized it, I said, I'm a red-lip theologian. And he looks at me, because I'm pretty sure he hadn't done the readings, so he was trying to figure out if that was in the readings and we was going to have to talk about it for the week. And so he was like, well, who came up with that? And I was like, me, just now. And I'm putting my stuff in my bag to walk off, because it was, one, the audacity, but two, it was, as soon as I said it, it made all the sense in the world to me. And I realized that for a lot of us as Black women, it stood in the tradition of me naming myself for myself, right? That what does it mean that the labels that we carry are the ones that we give ourselves, right? That we walk away from what people say we should be shaped into and understand ourselves to be, and make claims and demands on ourselves and say, no, this is who I am. And to require people to call us by our names, right? And so Red Lip Theology became for me, as we were writing this book, this opportunity to think about what it means to be a Black millennial woman who was raised both by the church and who was steeped in hip hop culture, right? So my mother, I tell people that I was raised at this vortex of faith and feminism because my parents were not married, and my mother and my father at the time belonged to a faith tradition, a denomination that suggested that one of their requirements was that if you were not married but were pregnant, you would have to stand in front of the congregation and apologize. Ironically, that was only expected of my mother. My father was in the choir, because that's how they met. I call them the Marvin Gaye and the Tammy Terrell of the church, because they met literally at choir rehearsal. I was like, what a cliche. But it was expected that my mother would stand in front of the church and repent and apologize to these people for being pregnant, because her sin was public, right? They could see what she had done. She didn't know what everybody else was doing, and as if she had done this by herself, because while she was set down and was not allowed to be a part of the choir or perform any duties in the church while she was pregnant with me, my father was able to still be on the choir. And and not only be on the choir, but lead songs, right? And so when it came time for my mother to apologize, she refused because she said that she did not want me to believe or think that I was a mistake. But at the same time, even though we went to another church, we joined another church before I was born, my mother felt like still the safest place as a single Black mother that she could raise me in was the church, right? So the very place that, gave her the scarlet letter was also the place that she felt like would keep me from, in many ways, doing the very thing that she had done. And as I was growing up, I spent days at church events. I was in youth groups, as many of us who are a part of that generation, youth groups that were at church. And then I came home and watched Yo MTV Raps and learned the lyrics to "It Takes Two to Make a Thing Go Right." That's the first rap song I learned, and I still know the words. And I remember my first Easter speech. I remember all of the plays that I was a part of. I actually was telling my uncle, I remember having to learn the "I Have a Dream" speech and say it every MLK Sunday. And then the Negro Mother, the poem, The Negro Mother, saying that every Black History Month. There was an identity and a formation that happened for me in church. There was also an identity and a formation that was happening for me outside of the world of church. That forced me to ask some specific questions, as many of us have, right? And so here I am now on this, as I was writing, prior to writing Relative Theology, what many of us call this deconstructionist journey, this decolonizing of faith. What does it look like for me to embody a faith that loves Black women? What does it mean for me to embody a faith that loved my mother, that would not have forced her to, or tried to force her to stand in front of a congregation and apologize? But be clear, even though my mother chose not to do that, there are many women who had to. There are many women who had to, for the sake of the fact that, unfortunately, sometimes in deeply religious communities, the institution of the church and religion itself get conflated. So the moment that you begin to question the actions of the institution, it's assumed and projected that you are now questioning the very foundations of your faith. And for Black women, we bear that the heaviest, because we live already in worlds and in communities where our Black womanhood was already rendered insignificant. And so yet, we still pray. We still go to church. We still fast. We still believe. There was a study done, and it gets replicated quite often by the Kaiser Family Institute. Black women in America remain the most religious demographic in this country. We are more religious, actively religious than Black men. We are more actively religious than white women, than white men, than men and women of color. So then my questions have always been, what is owed to Black women for that level of religiosity? What is owed to Black women for that level of commitment? And so Relative Theology was and is my way of trying to make sense of that, right? what is owed to me as a Black girl who was raised hearing sermons that essentially said, if my mother loved God enough, I wouldn't be here, right? What does it mean for what am I owed as a Black girl who had a largely absent father, who is heralded in church space, right? Who is celebrated for his gifts in church, right? Whose Pop Warner team can win one game and he literally becomes Mahatma Gandhi in the city, right? Like what is owed to me for all of the years that I had to make sense of a life without him? And I think that what this book, what my work with Religion News Service and all of these other places, and not just my work, but there's a generation of us now who are coming into voice. What our work is trying to push towards and honor is that there are some wounds. There are some questions. We have often, for our own detriment, many millennials, and I was told the other day that I am considered a geriatric millennial, and I am still working through that. But for many of us who are millennials, we still work with the vestiges of what happens in this house stays in this house. And we're still working through the remnants of, ooh, I'm scared to say this because if I say this, then it's gonna offend this person. And Gen Z don't have any of those qualms. Let me tell you, Gen Z will tell it and make you deal with the fallout of it, right? There is some freedom in that, right? Especially if we want freedom. Because for most of us who are on deconstructionist journeys, for many of us who are in these spaces, Black and white, people of color and non-people of color, I think we've gotten to a point where we realize that there is a lot that there has been a lot that we have been told that is just fundamentally not true and not helpful, right? When we can see people pray before they storm the Capitol, right? When we can see people pray and say that they are doing something in the name of Jesus as they are chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," right? There's something fundamentally flawed and broken about our faith systems. When we can, and I can say this as a Black woman, when we see people, Black people, shot down extrajudiciously by the police and by the state, and a microphone is shoved into the face of a family member, and the first question that is asked is, do you forgive them? Something is fundamentally broken with our faith systems, right? And it requires us to think critically about the world that we are in and the world that we want to see. Real theology is the world I want to see. You don't have to go to Sephora or Ulta and spend $20 on Too Faced Better Than Sex mascara to get there, although it is a great mascara. You don't have to do those things. You just have to be committed to a space of truth. You have to be committed to a life of authenticity. you have to be committed to creating space for the person that you want to be to emerge. That can happen whether you rock Fenty's Stunner or whether you just keep a jar of Vaseline for the days that you might feel a little chapped, right? But it is about creating the spaces for us to be and to believe. Lastly, I thought about what a charge looks like for people who do not look like me. And it's so funny because as somebody who deals with words all day, I was trying to find the best words to use. And it's so funny because I had I'm looking at my notes, they're scratched out this word, and I just ended with a charge to white people, because that's really what I want to give, is a charge to white people. There is a need for those who consider themselves to be allies, comrades, co-conspirators, particularly to critically engage your faith systems. What have you been taught? What do you believe, and why? And the why is the most important, because we are now in a moment where, now more so than ever, where Christian nationalism is white supremacy. We are in a space now where to be a person of faith and white has become to be emboldened by notions of white supremacy and power, even if it's unknowingly, right? I do not, as I sit with my friends who are, I have non-Black friends, and I have friends who we are all working together to create the world that we want to see. They always tell me, I have to do the work to decenter myself. I have to do the work to ask myself why I believe this, what I was told to believe, who pushed me to believe these things, and what does that mean? As white people, we need you to do that work. We need you to do that work because I am tired of hearing that books are banned simply because they may make people uncomfortable because they within those pages contain the truth, right? We are in a library, right? The fact that there are books, the fact that there are classes that are being denied to students across this country because it makes the history of this country feel unbearable for certain people is atrocious, for lack of a better word. So what do non-Black, non-people of color owe us as we fight to create worlds that are sustainable, worlds that are safe, and worlds that are equitable for all of us? You owe it to us, if you are people of faith, to inquire, particularly Christians, because that is where my work is largely rooted in. You owe it to us to interrogate the systems that push and ground you, and ask yourself, do they reflect the world that we want to see? They might not often reflect the worlds that you want to see, but y'all had a good running start. It's time to shift some gears and shift some balances of power. So, it's time for us to have our cookies too, right? As my grandmother would say. Give us room to live and be and breathe and enjoy and thrive and grow and flourish. Because when we are given those opportunities to do that, the world can do that. As a womanist, we believe that when you give Black women the space to thrive, the world thrives. When Black people are given space to thrive and be safe and go home and go to work and be able to come back to each place safely, everyone can thrive. And if your ideas of thriving and surviving are rooted in a faith context, then you have to do the work to ensure that that faith context is not grounded in white supremacy. So whether it takes you it may take you a trip or two to Sephora or Ulta to get there. I give you the steps of how to slay your face in the book, so you can get there, but we need to be there. I am, again, deeply honored for the opportunity to be with you today for this hour, and again, this evening. They told me that if you have any questions or want to have any conversations around faith and around the book, and if you could stay right there. So thank you all so much. I'm going to assume I can open one of these because I'm third. Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you first and foremost for being here.
Thank
Such
you.
an honor to hear you talk about your book and your work and your thoughts on theology.
Thank you.
And I had a question. We're at an intersection in time where a reemergence and maybe a discovery for a lot of folks in the Black community is leaning towards traditional African religious and spiritual practices. And I wonder what your thoughts are around folks who are existing potentially at the intersection of Christian faith and wanting to connect to that traditional spiritual practice.
Thank you. The first thing I would say is that for anyone who is curious, is that that has always been a practice particularly within Black communities. In the book, I say that my faith is grounded in the teachings of Jesus, the wisdom of my ancestors, and the power of Black womanhood, and that all of them save me over and over again. There's always been space for Black people, particularly Black people of faith, to honor the work not only of their ancestors, but to honor the cultural spiritual identity that is and has been uniquely ours, right? Like, I remember growing up and me and other people in our family who may have had the gift, right? And you are always guided to and connected with the family members that knew how to nurture those kinds of gifts that were not particularly the ones that were affirmed in Scripture, but were cultural, right? There is, and I say this as I'm laughing because this conversation has come at a very interesting moment for young Black women right now, because Beyonce's Renaissance, which, I got a ticket, y'all. Beyonce's Renaissance tour. Yes, thank you. The tour has come out, and there was a pastor who was like, if you are a Christian, you should not be attending this concert. And then there were all of these conversations around what Beyonce is practicing, and that we've been seeing it more as of late. And I did an interview about it, and I was like, I'm actually excited, right? Because here you have arguably the biggest star in the world who has not shied away from her faith and has not shied away from the fact that it's grounded in the reality that she's a Black woman, and that she has African ancestry. And I think that if if we open ourselves up to what has always been, it leads us to freedoms that we especially need now. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your presence and your message.
Thank you.
And I got a free book, so I can't wait to read your book.
I can't wait to sign
I never
it.
win raffles ever, and today's my lucky day, so meant to be. I have so many questions, but I guess what I really want to relate to is my own personal faith journey and clearly what you have laid out here. I've also been called to be of service. I'm contemplating going to seminary. I only recently made the choice to not go to seminary for a lot of reasons, but I'm curious to know for you, you're standing in front of what might be called a church. These are all people who are curious. You're delivering something that might be called a sermon. I'm wondering if you feel called to do this work and that this is your pulpit, and to the extent to which you feel called to do church ministry and what that tension might look like and how you see yourself as a servant of God and truth and liberation.
Thank you. Anybody who follows me knows on the socials, people call me a pastor all the time, and I tell them until we can have church at brunch, and I can curse, I probably will never be someone's pastor. But I say in seriousness, before I knew what a calling was, I knew that I was called to words. I knew that something happened when I wrote, something happened for me, and then something happened for other people. And it took a minute for me to recognize, one, that that was a gift. For a very long time, and I said at the beginning, while I named women clergy who have done and made inroads, the truth was I didn't see anybody like me. Somebody who is very clear. Like, I'm very clear that I'm not called a pastor in the way that is traditional. But I always wanted to do the intersection of faith and culture and faith and entertainment and those kind of things, and I didn't see that. So I remembered thinking that the only thing that I could do was preach and become a preacher. And I talk about this in the book where I told my mom, I had that conversation with my mom about being called to preach. And she was like, no, you're not. I was like, I must be a terrible sinner if my mom was like, you cannot preach. But it was that, and I'll never forget that she told me, she was like, what you are supposed to do is bigger than the four walls of the church. And what I learned as I do this and what I tell people is that I'm excited and I'm grateful that I listened to her in that regard, because Relative Theology is not necessarily a book that I could have put out if I'm ordained working in a church under a pastor. Like, I can't tell you how many times there are women clergy who come up to me and are like, I agree with everything that you say, but sometimes I like your post and unlike your post because I don't want to lose my job. So it becomes, so I tell people all the time, particularly those of us who I believe have non-conventional and innovative callings, like, the world looks different. Like, this is the first time that y'all have actually convened physically since the pandemic. I tell the pastors that I work with and their churches that I work with, there's gonna be some people who are not gonna come back to church post-pandemic, right? Like, what do we offer them? There are gonna be some people who now, because everybody has to stream, have so many different options. I'm gonna get my praise and worship from here. I'm gonna get the sermon from there. I like how she prays, so I'm gonna wait until the end and I'm gonna pray, and then I'm gonna go to the farmer's market. Typically, that's how my Sundays go. But there are people who do that, right? So what does it mean for us to think about the ways that we can have conversations about faith, conversations about religiosity and spiritual formation in unconventional ways that take us outside of the church? I think that's the work now. I think the church, I may be completely naive, but I think the church is self-sustaining at this point. There are going to be people who go to seminary, who have a path towards ministry. I don't think we're ever going to lose that, because there are some people that are called that way. But what does it look like for us to think about how we can continue to have these kinds of conversations for people who are thinking about things, who for whatever reason will never step into a church, but they'll come to this library? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a little nervous
Oh, don't be.
and a little shook because everything you said, like, resonated with me so much. And, like, this was just, like, happen chance that I was going through Instagram and, like, saw an ad, a post for this event. So I have 2 questions.
Okay. You can ask whatever you want to ask me.
Thank you. One of the things that you said that really spoke to me, like I've always told myself, like, to, my notes, to stay committed to shaping the world as I see fit. But it's something that I always continually struggle with because it's just very difficult. So 1, I just kind of want to hear your advice on that. And 2, yeah, from a young age, I was very active in the church and my faith, but I abandoned that. And it wasn't until recently that I started understanding more about how having like faith and spirituality doesn't have to look the way that I was taught. And so my other question is just like, how does somebody start to come to terms with all the contradictions that they grew up learning? Yeah, because I identify as a Black queer woman, and that was a huge factor of my loss of faith.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for sharing. I wanna offer first. I wanna challenge a bit of your. I wanna push you to reframe that it's not necessarily abandonment of it as much as you are being reintroduced to something much more deeper and something much more fulfilling and much more sustaining. I had to reframe that. 1, because there are a lot of people who told me, this is not Christian. This is not, like, you are a reprobate. Like, I was born and raised Baptist, so like half of like my Sunday school teachers think I got 9 toes in hell. So like, I mean, it is a daily work to realize, right, that that God is not this, and here's the thing, I'm talking about God within the context of what I grew up in, but I also want to use it for the much larger holy deities. I do not think that any higher power is here for our pain and destruction. I sincerely believe that any form of spirituality, any form of faith and religion is for our sustaining and for our thriving. The moment that it becomes that, like, this is to help, like, we need this pain or the moment it becomes this very like toxic and manipulative and restrictive thing, it's not holy to me. And I don't think it's holy, right? So part of it for me has always been, and you ask about like how do you steady, like what does it look like when you're in that wave? What do I know to be true? And I remember there was a time where it was like right after my mom died, and I just wrote down the things I knew to be true about God in that moment. And the list has grown since then. Like, I'm not gonna lie, the first time I wrote that list, I think I had like 3 things. And I was like, oh shit, maybe my Sunday school teacher's right. Maybe I might be going to hell. Like there was that moment where it was like, well, you know, this looked differently in my head. But it was about developing an authentic faith. So I had to steady myself in what do I believe to be true? If I believe that faith, if I believe that spiritual formation, if I believe that religion is to strengthen me, then anything that negates and rejects me, it can't be rooted in that. That became the center for me, right? And so I think that part of it has to be figuring out what that center looks like. And in that commitment of the world that you want to see, it's rooted in ensuring that everybody can have that, right? Like, I don't have to understand what someone believes. I don't have to understand all of the aspects of someone's faith to know that we should not live in a world that demonizes it, right? I don't have to live in a world as a Christian that the only right and true religion is Christianity. Because most Christians scare me. I think we're weirdos, right? So in a world where that looks like that, I'm a little bit nervous, right? What does it look like for all of us to believe what we choose to believe? I'll finish it with this. I had a friend, and she's still one of my really good friends, who her family believes in reincarnation. And I was a kid, and I was like, what? Like, I was like, Mama, like, she said they're gonna die and they're gonna come back. And my mama was like, okay. And I said, but Reverend Walker, and that was our pastor at the time, he don't say nothing about us dying and we coming back. He said we're going to heaven. And my mom said, if she believes that she's going to die and come back as a butterfly, then she is going to be the most beautiful butterfly in this world. And I heard that from a mama who would literally shout around the church about going to heaven one day, right? Like that was not what she believed, but she taught me that it's okay for us to believe what we need to. So for me, that is the commitment of the world I want to see. I don't have to understand all of it, but I gotta make room for people to grow and thrive. So I think that's what it is. And so this is, I think, the last question, because they keep flicking the sign at me. But you're doing a great job.
Thanks for bringing up the part about white people and what work we need to do. I have conversations all the time to try to decentralize the conversation and understand, maybe not even understand, but have a feeling of inclusion. I guess for what I would like your help with is understanding maybe what's my prayer before, what's my prayer to get heavenly help with these conversations, because, often I think about Jesus had 3 years of ministry, and it didn't end well.
Right.
Or
at all.
Or at least from a human standpoint.
Right.
And, he was not but basically,
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do I have these hard conversations? What's my prayer for them? And maybe, maybe everyone can use that advice. Thanks.
Yeah, so I have a chapter in the book called God Made Me Black, and in the chapter I say, I think the prayer for white people is God make me less white. Because there is something embedded in the systems of whiteness that align itself with power and superiority, right? And so what does it mean to say, take away from me the belief that simply because I am white, that I should benefit from these structures, right? I think that for men, right? Like I think that for men. I think that for people who are heterosexual and cisgender. Like, what does it mean for us to reckon with our privileges and create and constantly be in a posture that pushes us to be honest about those systems, how we benefit from those systems, and the work that we need to do to dismantle those systems, because they're not the work of the people who are on the underside of them, right? And lastly, I'll say that I think it's a lifelong work. It's something that I don't think that, I think we're always being made, right? It's that work of the constant perfecting, right? It's undoing is a lifelong work. And I think that there's grace for all of us because we're not gonna get it right every time, right? And I think particularly for those of us who benefit from privileged systems, when we're held accountable to that, the quickest thing to do is say, you're right, I'm sorry. What do I need to do in order to make sure I don't make that mistake again? What do I need to do in order to grow from that? And I think that that's how we become safe to walk with, right? Like, I think that I told this to a group a couple of weeks ago. I'm interested in safe white people, right? Like, you're not gonna be perfect, right? But when you are safe, then you are people who recognize privileges, who immediately honor when boundaries and when privilege has been benefited from, and you do the work to restore whatever that harm has been. I said, I'm interested in safe white folks. Like, not I voted for Obama twice. Like, like I don't care. Like, I want to see the work that you're doing in order to make the world safer for me. Yeah. Thank y'all so much. Am I sitting right here? Okay.